Commander Marcus Reynolds feels cold steel against his neck as racist officers pin him against his car. Just another black man in the wrong neighborhood, they sneer. Their body cameras mysteriously malfunction as the beatings begin. They don't know he's already recording everything. Before we dive into this shocking story of justice and corruption, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you want to see more stories about brave individuals fighting against systemic racism. Now let's find out how a simple traffic stop turned into one of the biggest police corruption takedowns in FBI history. Marcus Reynolds was not an ordinary 54-year-old black man, despite what the officers of Westlake County Police Department would soon assume. With his salt and pepper hair cropped short, athletic build maintained through decades of discipline, and penetrating dark eyes that missed nothing, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had seen the worst of humanity, still believed in justice. As the newly assigned undercover FBI commander with the Civil Rights Division, Reynolds had built his 30-year career investigating the most sensitive cases of corruption within law enforcement agencies across America. His personnel file contained multiple commendations, successful operations that had cleaned up police departments from Miami to Seattle, and a reputation for being methodical, patient, and utterly uncompromising when it came to upholding the oath he had taken to protect the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. The Westlake County assignment had come directly from the FBI director after multiple reports of racially motivated arrests, excessive force, and suspicious deaths in custody had created a pattern impossible to ignore. Local complaints had been buried internal affairs investigations, mysteriously closed without findings, and community leaders who spoke up found themselves targeted for minor infractions or worse. Marcus had been briefed extensively on Chief Richard Holloway, a 25-year veteran of the department, who had risen through the ranks despite numerous complaints of racial bias and brutality. Under Holloway's leadership, black residents of Westlake County were 8 times more likely to be arrested than white residents, and use of force incidents had increased 300% in predominantly black neighborhoods. The mission was clear but dangerous: gather irrefutable evidence of systematic discrimination and civil rights violations within the Westlake Police Department, build a federal case that couldn't be dismissed by sympathetic local judges, and dismantle the corrupt power structure from the inside out. The stakes couldn't be higher for the black community of Westlake, who lived in constant fear of the very people sworn to protect them. Children were taught from a young age to keep their heads down when police were around. Local businesses suffered from constant harassment under the guise of routine inspections, and young black men in particular faced a gauntlet of suspicion and aggression, simply going about their daily lives. Marcus arrived in town on a Tuesday, a deliberately ordinary day, driving a modest 5-year-old sedan that wouldn't attract attention. He had rented a small 2-bedroom house in Oakwood, a predominantly black middle-class neighborhood that had been experiencing increasing police presence in recent months. His cover identity was meticulously crafted: Marcus Wilson, a retired accountant moving to Westlake to be closer to family, with a background just interesting enough to be believable, but boring enough that few would ask many questions. That first week, Marcus established his routine frequenting local businesses, taking morning walks, and carefully observing the community dynamics, while appearing to be nothing more than a slightly reserved new neighbor. He noted how patrol cars seemed to circle his block at least once every hour, how officers would routinely stop young black men walking home from work, and how white visitors to the neighborhood were occasionally pulled over as soon as they left. 7 days into his assignment, while sitting on his front porch with a cup of coffee and the local newspaper, Marcus witnessed officers Brett Cooper and Sean Miller stop a young black man who couldn't have been more than 17. The teenager was walking home from school, backpack over his shoulder, when the patrol car screeched to a halt beside him. Marcus watched as the officers forced the visibly terrified young man against their vehicle, conducted a rough search that sent his school books scattering across the sidewalk, and berated him with questions about drugs and weapons. Finding nothing after several humiliating minutes, they eventually let him go with a warning about looking suspicious. The entire incident was captured by the miniature high-resolution camera disguised as a button on Marcus's shirt, adding to his growing collection of evidence. That night, as he encrypted and transmitted his first week's observations to headquarters, Marcus knew that to truly expose the depth of corruption in Westlake, he would need to experience it firsthand. He would need to become a target. 3 weeks into his assignment, Marcus implemented the next phase of his plan: direct contact with Westlake's finest. He chose a Thursday evening to drive his recently purchased secondary vehicle, a well-maintained black luxury sedan that was modest enough for a comfortable retiree, but expensive enough to draw attention. His route took him through Lakeside Heights, an affluent, predominantly white neighborhood where the median home value exceeded $700,000. Marcus drove exactly 3 miles per hour, under the speed limit, signaled properly for every turn, and made sure all his lights were functioning perfectly. He knew it wouldn't matter. 8 minutes into his drive through Lakeside Heights, flashing blue lights appeared in his rearview mirror. Marcus pulled over, immediately positioned his dashboard camera for optimal recording, and activated the additional microphones hidden throughout his vehicle. He placed his hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, visible to approaching officers. Officers Brett Cooper and Sean Miller approached his vehicle with hands resting on their holstered weapons flashlights, aimed directly at Marcus's face, despite the street being well lit. License and Registration Officer Cooper demanded without preamble, deliberately avoiding any greeting or explanation for the stop. "May I ask why I'm being pulled over, officer?" Marcus asked calmly, his voice steady and respectful despite knowing exactly what was happening. "Just hand over your ID and registration now." Miller snapped from the passenger side, his flashlight beam never leaving Marcus's eyes. "I'll reach for my wallet slowly." Marcus narrated his movements, following the survival protocol familiar to Black Americans across the country. As he handed over his carefully crafted identification documents, Cooper smirked at his partner. "What brings you to this neighborhood, Wilson, visiting friends?" The question dripped with skepticism. "Just taking an evening drive, officer. I recently moved to the area and was exploring the different neighborhoods," Marcus responded, maintaining his cover perfectly. "Pretty nice car for someone living over in Oakwood," Miller commented, eyeing the vehicle's interior. "Is this really yours, or did you borrow it from someone?" The implication was clear and deliberately offensive. "I purchased it after my retirement," Marcus explained, allowing just enough controlled indignation to show in his voice. "I worked hard for 40 years as an accountant. I earned every cent that paid for this car." Cooper laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "Well, we've had reports of suspicious vehicles in the area. Several break-ins. You fit the description." There had been no such reports, Marcus knew. He had monitored police communications as part of his investigation. "I assure you, I'm just driving through. I haven't stopped anywhere except when you pulled me over," Marcus said, his calm demeanor clearly irritating the officers who expected either fearful compliance or angry resistance, either of which would give them the excuse they sought. "Step out of the vehicle, sir," Cooper ordered suddenly. "We're going to need to search this car." "I don't consent to a search," Marcus stated firmly. "Am I being detained? If so, on what grounds?" The question triggered an immediate escalation. Cooper yanked the door open while Miller called for backup, claiming a potentially hostile subject. Within minutes, Sergeant James Wilson arrived, an older white officer with cold blue eyes and a reputation for handling difficult arrests in the black community. Having some trouble understanding simple instructions, Sergeant Wilson asked as he approached deliberately, intimidating as he towered over Marcus, who was now standing beside his car. "No, sir. I simply asked why I was being pulled over and stated that I don't consent to a search without probable cause," Marcus replied. "That's not your decision to make," Wilson snapped. "We've got probable cause. You're a black male driving an expensive vehicle in an area where you don't belong after dark. That's suspicious activity in my book." The blatant admission of racial profiling was exactly what Marcus had hoped to capture. "I'm going to reach for my phone to record this interaction," Marcus stated, moving his hand slowly toward his pocket. "The hell you are," Cooper barked, grabbing Marcus's arm roughly and spinning him around, hands on the hood. "Now, What followed was textbook excessive force under color of authority. All three officers participated in handcuffing Marcus with unnecessary roughness, conducting a search of his person that went well beyond professional standards, and tossing the interior of his vehicle while making continuous derogatory comments about you people, and how they always think they're above the law. Finding nothing illegal, they nevertheless impounded his vehicle, claiming it needed to be thoroughly searched at the station, and placed Marcus in the back of the patrol car for questioning. At the Westlake police station, Marcus was placed in an interrogation room and left alone for over an hour, a common intimidation tactic. When the door finally opened, a new face appeared. Officer Amara Johnson was one of only 3 black officers in the entire department, a tall woman with close-cropped natural hair and wary eyes that suggested she had seen too much. She placed a cup of water on the table without meeting Marcus's gaze. "They're processing your paperwork," she said quietly. "Should be released soon if everything checks out." Her tone carried a warning that things rarely checked out for black detainees. Marcus nodded his thanks, studying her carefully. Her body language spoke volumes. Shoulders tight with tension. Eyes that never quite met his. The slight distance she maintained from the white officers visible through the open door. She was surviving, not thriving, in this department. As Officer Johnson left, Marcus activated a tiny, specialized FBI surveillance device disguised as a button that had fallen from his shirt during the search. It rolled under a nearby filing cabinet, where it would transmit audio from the room for weeks to come. Chief Holloway himself made a brief appearance, eyeing Marcus with undisguised contempt before nodding to Sergeant Wilson. "Make sure Mr. Wilson understands how things work in Westlake before he leaves," he said before departing. 3 hours after being pulled over for suspicious driving, Marcus was finally released with a warning and 3 fabricated citations for minor traffic violations. His car would remain impounded for administrative processing, forcing him to call a rideshare service to return home. As he was escorted out, Marcus noticed Officer Johnson watching him with an unreadable expression. Something in her eyes suggested she had questions about this particular detainee, who had maintained his composure throughout an ordeal designed to provoke fear or rage. Marcus had passed his first test, establishing himself as a target while gathering valuable evidence. The trap was baited, but the hunters had no idea they were actually the hunted. The morning after his detention, Marcus began the methodical work that had made him legendary within FBI circles. Every detail from the previous night's encounter was cataloged, time-stamped, and cross-referenced with Westlake Police Department protocols, state laws, and federal civil rights statutes. The violations were numerous and blatant: unlawful detention, illegal search and seizure, excessive use of force, racial profiling, explicitly stated violation of due process, fabrication of charges, and abuse of authority, all captured in pristine audio and video that would be admissible in federal court. But one incident, however egregious, wasn't enough to prove systemic corruption. Marcus needed to establish patterns, identify all key players, and connect the individual acts of discrimination to department-wide policies, official or unofficial. This was where Marcus excelled, in the patient, meticulous construction of airtight cases that couldn't be dismissed as a few bad apples. The impoundment of his luxury vehicle actually worked in his favor, forcing him to walk through Oakwood and neighboring communities, appearing as just another black resident navigating life without reliable transportation. People noticed him waiting at bus stops, walking home with groceries, and sitting in the local barber shop. Gradually, cautiously, they began to talk. "4th time this month, they've stopped my boy coming home from basketball practice," confided the barber, a respected elder in the community named Walter Jenkins. 17 years old, honor roll student, never been in trouble, but they got him spread-eagled on the ground last week because he matched some description. Always some description. Marcus listened, asked careful questions, and began building a network of contacts who had experienced or witnessed police misconduct. The pattern was clear. Specific officers, including Cooper, Miller, and Wilson, routinely targeted black residents, especially young men and anyone who appeared to have financial success. Citations and arrests spiked dramatically at the end of each month, suggesting quota systems. The most disturbing cases involved physical abuse during arrests, followed by charges of resisting arrest or assaulting an officer when victims attempted to protect themselves. 2 weeks after his detention, Marcus attended a community meeting held in the basement of Bethel AME Church, ostensibly about neighborhood watch programs, but actually a safe space for residents to discuss police harassment. There he met Sophia Washington, a fierce community activist in her early 40s who had been documenting police misconduct for years without any official action resulting from her efforts. "They've got the judges, the prosecutors, and half the city council in their pocket," Sophia explained, after Marcus shared a carefully edited version of his own experience with the department. "Every complaint disappears. Every lawsuit gets dismissed. Meanwhile, our community lives in fear of the people who are supposed to protect us. Do you believe this level of corruption can exist in law enforcement without consequences?" Comment number 1. If you think police departments should have more external oversight, or number 2, if you believe internal affairs divisions can effectively police their own. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to see more stories exposing systemic injustice. Now, what would you do if you were Marcus, gradually uncovering a web of corruption while maintaining a dangerous undercover identity? Through Sophia, Marcus met Michael Taylor, a 22-year-old construction worker who had been beaten so severely during a traffic stop that he required hospitalization. The officers claimed he had reached for a weapon, but no weapon was ever found. Michael now walked with a permanent limp and suffered from traumatic stress so severe he rarely left his mother's home. "I can't file a complaint," Michael told Marcus, his voice barely above a whisper. "They know where I live. They drive by slow just to let me know they're watching. My little brother still has to walk these streets. My mom still has to live here." The fear in Michael's eyes triggered memories from Marcus's own youth in Chicago's South Side, where police were often seen as an occupying force rather than public servants. At 17, Marcus had been wrongfully arrested, the officer's knee on his neck, as he struggled to breathe, charged with a crime committed by someone else entirely. That experience had nearly derailed his life, but instead galvanized his determination to change the system from within. After graduating top of his class in criminal justice and law school, he had chosen the FBI specifically for its jurisdiction over civil rights violations by law enforcement. For 30 years, he had carried the memory of that officer's knee, using it to fuel his unwavering commitment to justice. With the community's cautious trust established, Marcus moved to the next phase of his investigation: surveillance of the key officers. Using specialized FBI equipment and techniques, he documented Officer Cooper and Miller's patrol patterns over 3 weeks. The data was damning. 87% of their stops involved black drivers or pedestrians, despite the county being 62% white. They spent 74% of their patrol time in predominantly black neighborhoods, conducted searches in 93% of stops involving black subjects, compared to only 12% for white subjects, and issued citations at a rate 5 times higher to black residents than white residents for identical violations. The pattern extended beyond individual officers. Marcus discovered through carefully placed sources and surveillance devices that arrest quotas were significantly higher for patrols assigned to black neighborhoods. Officers were incentivized with overtime and choice assignments for high arrest numbers, while those who failed to meet quotas were assigned to undesirable shifts. Most disturbing was the evidence of systematic manipulation of evidence. Body camera footage was routinely lost for controversial arrests. Evidence logs showed patterns of planted contraband in cases involving black suspects. Reports were modified after the fact to justify excessive force. The corruption was not random or the work of a few rogue officers. It was institutionalized, methodical, and protected by a chain of command that extended from patrol officers all the way to Chief Holloway and beyond. Each night, Marcus encrypted his findings and transmitted them through secure channels to his FBI handler director Sandra Chen, a brilliant tactician who had worked with Marcus on previous high-profile cases. "The evidence is compelling," she acknowledged during one of their rare secure phone conversations. "But we need to identify all key players before moving. This kind of systemic corruption doesn't exist in isolation. There are judges, prosecutors, possibly elected officials involved. Marcus agreed. The web of corruption in Westlake appeared to extend into the courthouse and city hall. To bring it all down, he would need to go deeper, take greater risks, and find the connections that would turn a case against individual officers into a RICO case against an entire corrupt system. The danger was escalating daily, but so was the potential impact of the case. Thousands of lives could be changed if they succeeded, generations of injustice addressed. It was worth the risk. What Marcus didn't know was that he had already attracted the attention of those at the highest levels of the conspiracy, and they were watching him much more closely than he realized. 6 weeks into his undercover operation, Marcus noticed subtle but significant changes in the atmosphere around him. The police presence in Oakwood increased dramatically, with patrol cars cruising past his rental home at least once every hour, day and night. When he visited local businesses, officers would often appear shortly after questioning owners about their new customer. His movements around town were clearly being monitored, though the officers maintained just enough distance to avoid obvious harassment. Chief Richard Holloway had taken personal interest in the retired accountant who had filed formal complaints about his detention and vehicle impoundment. Complaints from black residents weren't unusual, but something about Marcus's demeanor during his encounter with Cooper Miller and Wilson had raised red flags. Most detainees showed fear, anger, or resignation, all reactions the corrupt officers knew how to exploit. Marcus had shown calm determination and an unusual knowledge of legal procedures, characteristics that worried Holloway enough to order discreet surveillance. "Something's not right about this guy," he told Sergeant Wilson during a private meeting in his office, unaware that the FBI surveillance device Marcus had planted during his detention was capturing every word. "Run deeper background. Tax records property holdings, social media associates. Find me something we can use." The increased attention made Marcus's work more challenging, but also provided new opportunities. The closer they watched him, the more evidence he could gather of their discriminatory practices. He adjusted his movements to ensure he was frequently in public spaces where their surveillance would be documented by security cameras and witnesses. He filed meticulously detailed complaints about each incident of harassment, creating an official paper trail that would later support the pattern of misconduct. Each complaint was handled by Officer Amara Johnson, who had been specifically assigned to manage community relations issues, a role that often meant placating black residents without any actual investigation of their concerns. During these interactions, Marcus studied Officer Johnson carefully. Her body language, the careful neutrality of her responses, and the occasional flash of genuine concern in her eyes when she thought no one was watching, all suggested an officer uncomfortable with her department's practices, but unsure how to respond. The more Marcus observed her, the more convinced he became that Amara Johnson could be a potential ally, or at least a source of insider information. During his third visit to file a complaint, Marcus deliberately arrived just before the end of Johnson's shift, ensuring their interaction would extend beyond regular hours. As the station emptied and other officers headed home, he took a calculated risk. "Officer Johnson," he said quietly, after she had processed his paperwork, "I notice you're the only one who actually listens when I speak. The others have already decided I'm lying before I open my mouth." Johnson's eyes darted to the nearest security camera before she responded with professional detachment. "We take all complaints seriously, Mr. Wilson. Your concerns will be thoroughly investigated." But her slight emphasis on thoroughly carried a hint of irony that confirmed Marcus's suspicions. "I've been documenting everything," he continued, watching her reaction closely. "Every stop, every patrol car that passes my house 10 times a day, every random search. It creates a pretty clear pattern when you look at it all together." Something flickered in Johnson's eyes, recognition perhaps, or worry. "That's your right as a citizen," she said carefully. "Just be careful with how you use that information." It wasn't much, but it was enough. 2 days later, Marcus arranged to be at the local coffee shop when Johnson stopped in after her shift. Their conversation, seemingly casual to any observers, revealed that Amara had been gathering her own evidence of departmental misconduct for nearly 2 years. My father was beaten by police when I was a child, she confided once they had established that neither was wearing a wire, the irony being that Marcus was but for federal rather than local authorities. I became an officer, to change things from the inside, but she didn't need to finish the thought. Marcus understood perfectly the isolation, the pressure to conform, the subtle and not-so-subtle threats that came with challenging the blue wall of silence. I have over 200 incidents documented, she continued. Body cam footage saved before it could be deleted. Report drafts before and after they were altered. Audio of officers bragging about excessive force. But I don't know what to do with it. Internal affairs is just as corrupt, and any officer who reports misconduct ends up fired or worse. Marcus didn't reveal his true identity. He couldn't risk it yet, but he offered Amara a potential path forward. There are federal agencies that handle civil rights violations by police departments, he suggested carefully. Ways to report that bypass local authorities entirely. Amara's expression revealed both hope and fear. They would need to guarantee protection, she said. Not just for me, for my mother, my younger sister. The department has eyes everywhere in this county. Before Marcus could respond, their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Officers Cooper and Miller, who made a point of sitting directly behind Marcus, close enough that he could feel their breath on his neck. "Isn't this cozy?" Cooper remarked loudly. Officer Johnson getting real friendly with the local troublemaker. The threat was clear, directed at both of them. Amara immediately adopted her professional demeanor. "Just community outreach, sir. Chief's orders to improve relations in Oakwood." The officers didn't believe her, but the public setting prevented further intimidation. As they parted ways, Amara slipped Marcus a napkin with a single word written on it, "Tonight." That evening meeting in the parking lot of a grocery store, one county over Amara, revealed that Chief Holloway had issued explicit orders regarding Marcus Wilson. "They're going to move on you," she warned. "Cooper, Miller, and Wilson have been instructed to, quote, make an example of this troublemaker. They're planning to plant evidence in your home during a raid, probably drugs or an unregistered weapon. Enough to put you away for years." The confirmation of what Marcus had suspected sent a chill through him despite his decades of experience. When he asked simply, 3 days from now, Thursday night. "They're finalizing the warrant based on a fictional, confidential informant. Judge Harmon will sign anything Holloway puts in front of him." Marcus nodded already, adjusting his timeline. "Thank you for the warning. This is a significant risk you're taking." Amara's expression hardened with determination. "They killed my friend's brother last year. Claimed he reached for a gun during a traffic stop. There was no gun, just a cell phone. No charges, not even a suspension. I'm done watching it happen." Their unlikely alliance formed, Marcus returned home to prepare for the coming confrontation. He activated additional surveillance equipment throughout his house and vehicle, ensuring that every angle would be covered when the officers made their move. He secured encrypted backups of all evidence gathered so far and established emergency protocols with Director Chen. Most importantly, he prepared himself mentally for what was to come. The officers would not be gentle. They intended to break him both physically and spiritually, to make him an example of what happened to black men who dared to challenge police authority in Westlake County. To maintain his cover and gather the final evidence needed, Marcus would have to endure whatever came without revealing his true identity or purpose. The hunter had become the hunted, but in this dangerous game of cat and mouse, Marcus Reynolds was playing for much higher stakes than his opponents realized. Thursday night arrived with the heavy stillness that often precedes violent storms. Marcus sat in his living room, apparently relaxed as he read a book, but his senses were heightened to their sharpest edge. Every surveillance device was active, recording from multiple angles. His secure line to FBI headquarters remained open through an encrypted channel. Director Chen and her team were monitoring remotely, ready to intervene if the situation became life-threatening, though they all understood that premature revelation of the operation could compromise months of work and potentially allow key conspirators to escape justice. At precisely 11:14 p.m., the sound of vehicles with engines deliberately muffled approached his home from both directions. Marcus continued reading, appearing unaware as tactical positions were taken around his property. Only when the first heavy knock on his door was accompanied by shouts of "Police, open up," did he set his book aside and move calmly to answer. The moment the door opened, chaos erupted with choreographed precision. Officers Brett Cooper and Sean Miller burst through, weapons drawn, shouting contradictory commands designed to confuse and terrify. "Hands up! Get on the ground! Don't move! Turn around!" Behind them, Sergeant Wilson directed the operation with cold efficiency, while 4 additional officers secured the perimeter. Marcus complied as best possible with the conflicting orders, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. "I'm not resisting," he stated clearly. For the benefit of his recording devices, knowing the officers had already switched off their body cameras, as evidenced by the darkened indicator lights. "I am complying with all lawful commands." His calm compliance seemed to enrage Cooper, who grabbed him roughly and slammed him face first against the wall. "Shut your mouth. You think you're smarter than us filing complaints, talking to our officers. You're about to learn how we deal with troublemakers in Westlake." The next 20 minutes unfolded exactly as Marcus had anticipated. While Wilson supervised, Cooper and Miller conducted a destructive search of his home, deliberately breaking belongings, upending furniture, and creating maximum chaos. In the kitchen, out of Marcus's direct line of sight but captured perfectly by his hidden cameras, Miller removed a small bag of white powder from his own pocket and placed it in Marcus's cabinet. Similar plants of an unregistered handgun in the bedroom closet and several bags of pills in the bathroom completed the fabricated evidence collection. Throughout the search, Marcus was held in a stress position against the living room wall, receiving occasional blows to the kidneys or ribs whenever he attempted to speak or adjust his increasingly painful stance. The situation escalated when they moved him toward the front door for transport. As they passed his coffee table, Cooper deliberately shoved Marcus, causing him to stumble into the table and knock it over. "He's resisting," Cooper shouted, and all pretense of professional conduct vanished. What followed was a brutal, coordinated assault under the guise of subduing a non-compliant suspect. Marcus was thrown to the ground, where multiple officers delivered kicks and baton strikes to his torso and legs. Sergeant Wilson personally applied a knee to Marcus's neck, an echo of the formative incident from Marcus's youth, while Cooper secured handcuffs so tightly they cut into his wrists. "Can't breathe," Marcus gasped, partly for the record, and partly because it was true. "Good," Wilson replied, increasing the pressure slightly before finally relenting. "Next time you'll think twice before causing trouble in my town." Bloodied and bruised but still conscious, Marcus was dragged to the patrol car and transported to the station where the next phase of his ordeal awaited. The charges were predictably severe: possession of controlled substances with intent to distribute, illegal possession of a firearm, resisting arrest, and assaulting a police officer. Each charge was documented with fabricated evidence and nearly identical witness statements from all officers involved, describing a violent confrontation initiated by the suspect. At the station, Marcus was photographed, fingerprinted, and placed in an interrogation room rather than a holding cell, signaling that his night was far from over. After an hour of isolation designed to increase anxiety, the door opened to reveal Chief Richard Holloway himself, accompanied by Sergeant Wilson. No recording devices were visible, creating a scenario of plausible deniability for whatever would follow. Mr. Wilson Holloway began his tone almost conversational as he took a seat across from the handcuffed Marcus. "I think we got off on the wrong foot. I run a tight department here in Westlake. We keep the peace, keep the nice neighborhoods safe, make sure everyone stays where they belong. Simple system that works for everybody until someone like you comes along stirring up trouble." Marcus remained silent, his eyes never leaving Holloway's face, memorizing every detail of this conversation that his surveillance equipment couldn't capture. "Those are serious charges you're facing," Holloway continued. "Mandatory minimum sentencing means you're looking at 15 to 20 years. A man your age, that's practically a life sentence." He leaned forward, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "But it doesn't have to be that way. We can make this all disappear. Evidence has a way of getting misplaced when we want it to. All you need to do is sign a statement saying your previous complaints were mistaken, agree to leave Westlake County permanently, and provide some useful information about Miss Washington and her little community group. We know they're planning something, and we want details." The trap was beautifully laid, a perfect example of how the corrupt system operated, offering freedom in exchange for compliance and betrayal of the community. It was exactly the evidence Marcus needed to connect individual acts of misconduct to departmental policy. "I have nothing to say," Marcus replied, his voice steady, despite the pain from his injuries. "I want a lawyer." Holloway's friendly demeanor vanished instantly. "You uppity son of a bitch," he snarled, standing so abruptly his chair toppled backward. "You think a lawyer is going to help you? Every attorney in this county knows better than to cross my department. By the time you get some public defender from the city, the evidence will be processed. Your prints will be on everything, and you'll be just another black drug dealer off the streets. Nobody will question it, nobody will care." With a nod to Wilson, Holloway left the room. What followed was another hour of intimidation and psychological pressure, with Wilson detailing exactly how the department would ensure Marcus received the maximum possible sentence, how prisoners with complaints against police tended to face accidents in county lockup, and how any community support would be systematically dismantled through similar charges against key members. When Marcus continued his stoic silence, Wilson finally gave up and had him transferred to a holding cell for processing into the county jail system. As he was being led away, Marcus caught sight of Officer Amara Johnson watching from across the room, her face professionally blank, but her eyes communicating silent support. News of Marcus's arrest spread quickly through Oakwood. Sophia Washington, alerted by neighbors who had witnessed the raid, immediately began mobilizing community resources. By morning, a small crowd had gathered outside the police station demanding information about Marcus Wilson's condition and the charges against him. Inside his cell, Marcus activated the emergency FBI protocol through a seemingly innocuous request for medical attention due to his injuries from the resistance. The protocol would bring Director Chen personally to Westlake under the guise of a federal prison system medical consultant, allowing them crucial face-to-face communication while maintaining his cover. As the doctor examined his extensive bruising and likely cracked ribs, Marcus appeared to be just another victim of police brutality, awaiting a system designed to punish rather than protect him. In reality, he was exactly where he needed to be to gather the final pieces of evidence that would bring down not just a few corrupt officers, but an entire system built on racial oppression and abuse of power. Marcus's injuries from the arrest were severe enough to require genuine medical attention beyond what the county jail's basic facilities could provide. 2 cracked ribs, a dislocated shoulder that had been roughly reset during booking facial contusions, and internal bruising, all documented in meticulous detail by the prison doctor who recommended immediate transfer to Westlake County Hospital. This medical necessity created the perfect opportunity for the next phase of the operation. At the hospital, security protocols required that Marcus remain handcuffed to the bed, but allowed more privacy than the jail setting. It was here, during an examination behind closed doors, that Marcus finally came face-to-face with FBI Director Sandra Chen, posing as a specialist called in for consultation. Chen, a formidable woman in her late 50s with silver-streaked black hair and the focused intensity of someone who had broken numerous glass ceilings throughout her career, dismissed the guards to the hallway for patient confidentiality. During examination, once alone, they spoke rapidly in hushed tones. Status, Chen asked clinically while genuinely examining his injuries as cover. Evidence secured and transmitted, Marcus confirmed. Multiple recordings of illegal search and seizure planted evidence excessive force falsified reports. Holloway personally offered to drop charges in exchange for false statements against community activists and permanent relocation. Full conspiracy from patrol officers to chief, with strong indications of judicial involvement through Judge Harmon, who signed the fraudulent warrant. Chen nodded, her expression grim, as she documented his injuries with photographs that would later appear in federal court. Enough to move. Not yet, Marcus winced as she probed a particularly painful area on his ribcage. We've got the operational level locked down, but this goes higher. Judge Harmon is the key to the political connections. The department's targeting of successful black businesses and the pattern of civil asset forfeiture suggests financial motivation beyond simple racism. I need access to department financial records and communications between Holloway and city officials. Chen frowned genuine concern, breaking through her professional demeanor. Your cover is holding for now, but they're digging deeper. Background you established is good, but it won't withstand federal-level scrutiny if they get suspicious enough to reach out to agencies that could verify your identity. Timeline has accelerated. 2 more weeks, Marcus insisted. Court date is set for initial appearance. That gives us time to identify all major players before we move. Chen reluctantly agreed but established stricter emergency protocols and inserted 2 additional FBI agents into the local hospital staff to monitor his situation. Officer Amara Johnson, Marcus added as Chen prepared to leave. She's been gathering her own evidence against the department. Currently unaware of my identity, but providing insider information. She'll need full witness protection when this breaks. Their meeting concluded just as the guards were getting restless, with Chen providing official medical recommendations for Marcus's care that would ensure he remained in the hospital under observation for at least 48 hours. This brief respite from jail gave Marcus the opportunity for his most dangerous move, yet revealing his true identity to Officer Johnson. During a shift change that evening, Amara slipped into his hospital room ostensibly to check on the prisoner's security status. Her shock at his condition was evident despite her attempts to maintain professional detachment. They really worked you over, she observed quietly, checking that the hallway guard was not within earshot. Standard operating procedure, Marcus replied, studying her carefully before making his decision. Amara, I need you to listen very carefully and not react to what I'm about to tell you. She tensed clearly, expecting some sort of plea for help with escape or evidence tampering. What she heard instead changed everything. My name is not Marcus Wilson. I'm Commander Marcus Reynolds, Federal Bureau of Investigation Civil Rights Division. I've been undercover in Westlake for 3 months, building a case against the entire department and its political protection network. To her credit, Officer Johnson's only visible reaction was a slight widening of her eyes and a nearly imperceptible step backward. When she spoke, her voice remained low and steady. Prove it. Marcus directed her to a specific location in his impounded vehicle, where she would find a hidden compartment containing his FBI credentials. Memorize, but don't remove the ID number, then verify through the federal database. Use a secure computer outside the department. When you hear stories of corrupt systems, who do you think bears responsibility? Comment number 1, if you believe individual officers should be held accountable, or number 2, if you think the focus should be on the leadership and institutions that create these environments. Like and subscribe to follow Marcus's dangerous journey to expose corruption at every level. Do you think Amara will keep his secret, or will the pressure force her to betray him to save herself? The next 24 hours were the most dangerous of the operation. If Amara chose to reveal Marcus's identity to Chief Holloway, the entire case could collapse, and Marcus himself would likely not survive to see trial. But if she verified his credentials and committed to assisting the federal investigation, they would gain an invaluable inside source at the highest levels of the department. Marcus's gamble paid off. Amara returned the following evening, having used a library computer in the next county to verify his identity. I'm in, she said simply. Whatever you need. With Amara's cooperation, the investigation accelerated dramatically. As Marcus was returned to county lockup following his hospital stay, Amara became his eyes and ears within the department, strategically placed in records management where she could access the financial documentation Marcus needed. The evidence she gathered revealed a complex scheme extending far beyond racial harassment. Under Chief Holloway's direction, the department had been systematically targeting black-owned businesses and affluent black residents for excessive citations, arrests on manufactured charges, and civil asset forfeiture. The seized assets rarely made it fully into official department accounts. Instead, a significant percentage disappeared through a network of shell companies owned by Judge Harmon Mayor Robert Lancaster and 3 city council members. The corruption extended to the district attorney's office, where cases against department allies were routinely dismissed, while prosecutions of department targets were pursued with unusual vigor regardless of evidence quality. Even as Marcus built his federal case from inside a jail cell, Chief Holloway was increasing pressure on the community. Sophia Washington's home was raided under suspicious circumstances, though officers found nothing to charge her with. Michael Taylor was arrested for violating probation despite having completed his probation months earlier. The message was clear: anyone connected to Marcus Wilson would face consequences. Through it all, Marcus maintained his cover, refusing legal representation from the overworked public defender who briefly visited him, declining plea deals offered by a prosecutor, clearly uncomfortable with the high-profile nature of the prosecutor case and gathering information from other inmates about their experiences with Westlake's justice system. Each account added another piece to the mosaic of corruption he was assembling. As his court date approached, Director Chen made the final preparations for what they now called Operation Daylight. Federal agents were positioned throughout Westlake County. Electronic surveillance was expanded to cover all key locations, and a team of Department of Justice prosecutors was briefed on the evidence compiled over nearly 4 months of undercover work. The stage was set for one of the most significant police corruption takedowns in FBI history, with Marcus Reynolds, the imprisoned commander, at its center, waiting patiently for the moment to spring a trap 3 decades in the making. The Westlake County Courthouse stood as a monument to faded Southern grandeur, its columns and pediments suggesting justice, while the reality inside often delivered anything but. On the morning of Marcus's arraignment, the atmosphere was charged with unusual tension. News of his arrest had galvanized the black community, and despite intimidation tactics, over 100 protesters gathered on the courthouse steps, led by Sophia Washington and supported by civil rights organizations from neighboring counties. Inside the courtroom of Judge Harold Harmon was packed to capacity. Officers Cooper, Miller, and Wilson sat confidently in the front row, their testimony prepared and rehearsed. Chief Holloway observed from the back, maintaining the appearance of professional distance while ensuring his officers followed the script. District Attorney William Palmer shuffled papers at the prosecution table, unaware that within hours his career would be in ruins. Amara Johnson stood at attention near the door, ostensibly providing security, but actually confirming the positions of all key targets to the FBI team positioned outside. At precisely 9:30, Marcus was led into the courtroom in handcuffs and jail attire, the picture of a defeated man. The bruises on his face had faded to sickly yellow-green, but he moved carefully, ribs still tender from the beating. Judge Harmon called the court to order his demeanor, suggesting this would be a routine processing of yet another black defendant through a system designed to presume guilt rather than innocence. Case number 2047-873. State versus Marcus Wilson, the clerk announced. Charges include possession of controlled substances, with intent to distribute, illegal possession of a firearm, resisting arrest, and assaulting a police officer. Judge Harmon peered over his glasses at Marcus. How does the defendant plead? Before Marcus could respond, the courtroom doors opened, and Director Sandra Chen entered, followed by 12 federal agents in full FBI tactical gear. The shock that rippled through the courtroom was palpable. "What is the meaning of this interruption?" Judge Harmon demanded, his face flushing with anger. Chen approached the bench, presenting her credentials. "Your Honor, I am Director Sandra Chen, Federal Bureau of Investigation. I am here to take custody of this defendant, who is actually Commander Marcus Reynolds of the FBI's Civil Rights Division." The courtroom erupted in chaos. Chief Holloway moved toward the exit but found it blocked by federal agents. Officers Cooper, Miller, and Wilson froze in their seats, the blood draining from their faces as the implications became clear. Judge Harmon sputtered in confused outrage until Chen placed a federal warrant on the bench before him. "Furthermore, I have warrants for the arrests of Judge Harold Harmon, Chief Richard Holloway, officers Brett Cooper, Sean Miller, James Wilson, District Attorney William Palmer, Mayor Robert Lancaster, and City Council members Thomas Green, Patricia Donovan, and Lawrence Fisher, on charges including conspiracy against rights, deprivation of rights under color of law, witness, tampering evidence, tampering, perjury, extortion, money laundering, and racketeering under the RICO Act." Marcus stood, and despite his injuries, his transformation was remarkable. Gone was the defeated posture of a victim. In its place stood the unmistakable bearing of federal authority. When he spoke, his voice carried throughout the suddenly silent courtroom. For the record, I am Commander Marcus Reynolds, badge number 735892, Federal Bureau of Investigation. For the past 4 months, I have been conducting an undercover investigation into systematic civil rights violations, corruption, and criminal conspiracy within the Westlake County Police Department and municipal government. As he made this declaration, federal agents moved systematically through the courtroom, placing the named officials under arrest. The expressions of shock, betrayal, and fear that crossed their faces told their own story. Chief Holloway lunged toward Marcus, only to be immediately restrained by 2 agents. "You, son of a bitch," he snarled. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. I have friends in Washington who will bury you and this investigation." Marcus merely smiled. "Every word you say is being recorded and will be admissible in federal court, Chief Holloway. I'd advise you to exercise your right to remain silent before you add to the considerable charges against you." Outside the courtroom, the scene was being repeated throughout Westlake as synchronized raids targeted homes and offices of all major conspirators. Evidence was seized, computers confiscated, and bank accounts frozen in a carefully orchestrated operation that left no opportunity for evidence destruction or escape. As the news spread, national media descended on the previously obscure county. The story of an FBI commander who allowed himself to be beaten and imprisoned to expose corruption captured the public imagination and turned a local case of police misconduct into a national conversation about systemic racism in law enforcement. In the days that followed, Marcus worked with Director Chen and a team of federal prosecutors to organize the mountain of evidence he had collected. His hidden cameras had captured not only his own mistreatment, but dozens of instances of misconduct against other black residents. Audio recordings from his surveillance devices documented explicit racist policies, quota systems targeting minority neighborhoods, and financial crimes involving civil asset forfeiture. Officer Amara Johnson's internal documentation provided the paper trail connecting departmental actions to official policies and revealing the money flow from seized assets to private accounts. The most damning evidence came from the defendants themselves. Faced with the overwhelming case against them, several lower-ranking officers agreed to testify against their superiors in exchange for reduced charges. Their testimony revealed a conspiracy extending back more than a decade in which black residents were systematically targeted not only out of racial animus, but as part of a profitable criminal enterprise that had enriched department leadership and city officials through asset seizure, budget padding, and overtime fraud. Officer Sean Miller was the first to break, offering a full confession that implicated his partners and supervisors. It was made clear from day one, he testified in a recorded deposition. "If you wanted to advance in Westlake PD, you demonstrated your loyalty by targeting the right people. Black drivers in nice cars were always good for civil forfeiture. Black businesses got extra inspections until they paid protection money disguised as community support donations. Anyone who complained got special attention until they either left town or ended up in the system." Sergeant Wilson held out longer, but eventually revealed the direct orders from Chief Holloway regarding Marcus. The chief said, "This guy was becoming a problem, getting the community riled up. He told us to find something, anything to put him away. When we couldn't find legitimate charges, he authorized planting evidence. Said to make sure the charges were serious enough, he wouldn't see daylight for 20 years. The investigation expanded to include Judge Harmon's financial dealings, revealing offshore accounts containing millions of dollars traced directly to funds that should have gone into department or city coffers. Mayor Lancaster's emails showed explicit direction to police leadership about which businesses to target and which to leave alone based on political support and financial arrangements rather than any legal considerations. As federal agents took control of the Westlake Police Department's records, they discovered hundreds of cases of potential wrongful conviction spanning more than 15 years. A special task force was established to review every case prosecuted under the corrupt administration, with dozens of convictions immediately flagged for review and potential overturning. For the community, the revelations were both validating and traumatic. Decades of complaints that had been dismissed as paranoia or playing the race card were now proven true in the most public and undeniable way. The system that had oppressed them for generations was being dismantled before their eyes, but the damage it had caused to countless lives could never be fully repaired. Marcus, finally free to move about the community under his real identity, but with federal protection due to ongoing threats, met with Sophia Washington and other community leaders to discuss the path forward. This isn't just about punishing corrupt officials, he explained during a community meeting at Bethel AME Church. This is about rebuilding a justice system that actually delivers justice for everyone. The Department of Justice will be directly overseeing Westlake County law enforcement for at least the next 5 years, but the real work has to come from within the community. As the case moved toward multiple federal trials, the magnitude of what Marcus had accomplished became clear. Not just a few bad apples, but an entire corrupt system had been exposed and dismantled. The implications extended far beyond Westlake County, raising questions about similar patterns in other jurisdictions across the country. What had begun as one commander's dangerous undercover assignment had evolved into a national reckoning on police corruption and racial justice that would echo for years to come. The systematic dismantling of Westlake's corrupt power structure did not occur without desperate resistance. Despite being held in federal custody pending trial, Chief Richard Holloway maintained a network of loyal officers and civilian allies willing to protect the system that had benefited them for so long. 2 weeks after the dramatic courthouse arrests, Marcus returned to his temporary residence following a day of case preparation with federal prosecutors. The safe house, located in a quiet neighborhood 20 miles from Westlake, had been carefully selected and monitored by FBI security teams. As Marcus approached the front door, his instincts, honed by decades of high-risk operations, alerted him to subtle signs of disturbance. A window blind slightly askew, a security camera turned at an unusual angle. Instead of entering, he immediately retreated to his vehicle and contacted Director Chen. His caution saved his life. Remote inspection via security systems revealed explosive devices wired to both the front and rear entrances, professional-grade charges that would have obliterated the building and anyone inside. The FBI bomb disposal unit neutralized the threat, recovering evidence that would later be traced to Ryan Cooper, former Officer Brett Cooper's brother, and a military contractor with specialized demolition training. The assassination attempt was just the beginning. In the early hours of the following morning, Marcus's original rental home in Oakwood was firebombed, destroying not only the property, but 2 adjacent homes belonging to families who had cooperated with the federal investigation. Fortunately, all residents had been relocated to protective housing following the initial arrests, preventing casualties but heightening community fear. "They're sending a message," Marcus observed during an emergency security briefing. "Anyone who stands against the old system is at risk. This goes beyond simple retaliation. This is terrorism designed to frighten the community back into submission." Director Chen nodded grimly. "We've intercepted communications from Holloway to at least 17 current and former officers not yet charged. He's calling in every favor, activating every ally. They're on a scorched earth campaign." The most dangerous threat emerged from Ryan Cooper himself, whose military background and personal vendetta against Marcus created a volatile combination. Unlike the corrupt officers who had operated under the cover of legal authority, Ryan was unconstrained by any pretense of law. His first direct assault came during a transport between the federal building and the courthouse, when a precision rifle shot narrowly missed Marcus, striking his security vehicle's bulletproof glass. What followed was a high-speed pursuit through downtown Westlake, with Ryan Cooper leading federal agents on a dangerous chase that endangered countless civilians before he abandoned his vehicle and disappeared into the network of supporters still loyal to the old regime. The situation grew more complicated when Officer Amara Johnson's cover as an FBI cooperator was exposed. An internal department memo detailing her meetings with Marcus found its way to sympathizers of the corrupt officers, placing her in immediate danger. Marcus received the alert during a deposition and immediately mobilized a tactical team to Amara's location. They arrived to find her police vehicle riddled with bullets. but Amara herself had managed to escape the ambush by driving into a drainage canal and exiting through the emergency roof hatch, a maneuver she later credited to FBI tactical WWW training Marcus had provided during their collaboration. With Amara now in protective custody, Marcus orchestrated a complex extraction operation to secure all remaining confidential informants and community witnesses. The operation required precise coordination between multiple federal agencies and trusted local contacts conducted under the constant threat of surveillance and attack from Holloway's network. Even as Marcus worked to protect witnesses, a new threat emerged at the Westlake Police Department headquarters. The evidence room experienced a mysterious fire that destroyed potential evidence in dozens of cases of police misconduct. Only the foresight of the federal team in creating duplicate records prevented a catastrophic loss of documentation. Forensic investigation would later prove the fire was deliberately set by a night janitor with family connections to Sergeant Wilson. The coordinated nature of these attacks suggested a level of organization that extended beyond a few disgruntled officers. Financial tracking revealed significant funds, moving through shell companies previously identified in the corruption investigation now being used to finance what amounted to a counterintelligence operation against the federal investigation. They're not just fighting the charges Marcus explained to the federal prosecutor assigned to the case. They're fighting to preserve a system. The money, the power, the racial hierarchy they've benefited from for generations. They'll burn down the whole county before they let that system fall. The violence escalated when Michael Taylor, the young man who had been severely beaten by officers and had agreed to testify about his experience, was ambushed outside his mother's new protective location. Only the quick action of his federal protective detail prevented another tragedy. But the message was clear. No one who challenged the old order was safe regardless of federal protection. As Marcus coordinated security responses to these mounting threats, he began to notice inconsistencies in information flow within the federal operation itself. Protective locations that should have been known only to the core team were being compromised. Tactical plans seemed to be anticipated by Cooper and his associates. The inescapable conclusion was as disturbing as it was dangerous. They had a mole within the federal task force. Marcus initiated a compartmentalized investigation, sharing his suspicions only with Director Chen. Together, they created a system of information control and deliberate misinformation to identify the source of the leaks. The evidence gradually pointed toward Agent Thomas Layton, a 15-year veteran of the FBI who had worked with Marcus on 3 previous cases and was responsible for witness security coordination on the Westlake operation. The betrayal cut deep for Marcus, who had considered Layton a friend and trusted colleague. The motive, when discovered, proved to be a combination of financial incentives. Layton had gambling debts that had made him vulnerable to Holloway's offers and family connections to Judge Harmon that had never been disclosed in his personnel file. Rather than confront Layton directly, Marcus and Chen used him to feed controlled information to Holloway's network, setting the stage for a decisive counter-operation. They allowed Layton to discover plans for transferring key witnesses to a new location while actually preparing a trap for Ryan Cooper and his team of vigilantes. The confrontation came on a rainy Tuesday night on the outskirts of Westlake County. Cooper's team, acting on the leaked information, set up an ambush on the expected transport route. Instead, they found themselves surrounded by federal tactical teams, their escape routes blocked by carefully positioned armored vehicles. Ryan Cooper, realizing he had been betrayed, attempted a suicidal last stand that ended with him severely wounded but alive to face charges of attempted murder of federal officers, conspiracy, and domestic terrorism. With Cooper's capture, the organized resistance began to fragment. Individual acts of intimidation continued, but the coordinated campaign of violence gradually subsided as Holloway's resources and reach from federal detention diminished. Agent Layton was arrested quietly, his betrayal kept from public knowledge to prevent undermining confidence in the federal investigation. For Marcus, the personal cost of the operation continued to mount. The constant threat, the physical toll of his injuries from the original arrest, and the psychological strain of betrayal by a trusted colleague all weighed heavily. Yet he drove himself relentlessly determined to see the case through to its conclusion, to transform temporary intervention into lasting change for a community that had endured injustice for generations. The Retaliation campaign had failed in its primary objective to derail the federal prosecution, but it had succeeded in revealing the true depth and breadth of corruption in Westlake. What had begun as an investigation into racist policing practices had uncovered a multi-generational system of oppression, economic exploitation, and violence that extended into every aspect of local governance. As the case moved toward trial, the final pieces of the conspiracy were falling into place, revealing connections to state-level officials and suggesting that Westlake might be just one example of a much more widespread problem. For Marcus Reynolds, the most dangerous phase of his mission was coming to an end, but the true test of his life's work was just beginning. Could justice once served to corrupt officials actually transform a system built on centuries of precedent? Inequity. The federal courthouse in Atlanta stood as a symbol of impartial justice far removed from the corrupted local courts of Westlake County. Security was unprecedented for the arraignment of Chief Richard Holloway and his co-conspirators, with federal marshals scanning every visitor and snipers positioned on surrounding rooftops. Marcus Reynolds, now fully recovered from his physical injuries, but bearing the invisible scars of his ordeal, arrived under heavy protection for what should have been a routine procedural hearing. As he entered the building, Marcus noticed a maintenance worker, whose movements seemed slightly off-rhythm, hands moving toward a tool belt with unusual purpose. In that split second of recognition, Marcus tackled Director Chen to the ground as the disguised assassin, the FBI mole Agent Layton, had helped infiltrate security, raised a concealed weapon. Federal marshals neutralized the threat instantly, but the message was clear. Even here in the heart of federal justice, the tentacles of corruption still reached. The assassination attempt became the final piece of evidence connecting the local corruption to higher levels of government. The would-be assassin, when apprehended, was identified as a former state police officer with direct ties to Georgia State Senator William Hargrove, Judge Harmon's brother-in-law, and chairman of the state's Law Enforcement Oversight Committee. Financial records revealed millions in suspicious transactions between the senator's campaign funds and various entities in Westlake County, suggesting a protection racket that extended far beyond local policing. With these connections exposed, the full network of corruption finally came into focus. Over the following weeks, the Department of Justice announced indictments against 47 current and former Westlake police officers, 7 judges, 12 prosecutors, the mayor, 4 city council members, 3 state representatives, Senator Hargrove, and 22 business owners who had participated in money laundering and evidence tampering. The scale of the conspiracy was staggering, representing one of the largest police corruption cases in American history. The trials began 6 months after Marcus's original arrest, with Chief Holloway and the primary conspirators facing the most serious charges under federal civil rights and racketeering statutes. Marcus testified for 11 days, presenting the meticulous evidence he had gathered during his undercover operation. His testimony was powerful, not only for its factual precision, but for the controlled emotional impact as he described witnessing and experiencing the systematic oppression of Westlake's black community. This was not about a few officers making bad decisions in the heat of the moment, he explained to the riveted jury. This was a calculated system designed to criminalize blackness itself, to extract wealth from a community through selective enforcement, false charges, civil forfeiture, and the threat of violence. It was modern-day extraction of resources from a targeted population sanctioned by those sworn to uphold the law and protected by officials elected to represent all citizens. Officer Amara Johnson's testimony proved equally compelling, documenting the internal workings of the department and the systematic intimidation of officers who questioned racist practices. Her decision to risk her career and life by cooperating with the FBI investigation was widely credited with providing the insider perspective that made the case unassailable. One by one, the defendants were found guilty. Chief Holloway received multiple life sentences for civil rights violations, resulting in death, racketeering, witness tampering, and conspiracy charges. Officers Cooper and Miller each received 30-year sentences. Judge Harmon Mayer Lancaster and other officials received sentences ranging from 15 to 25 years. The financial penalties and asset forfeitures exceeded $100 million, with funds designated for community restitution and rebuilding. Beyond the criminal prosecutions, the Department of Justice implemented a complete overhaul of Westlake County's law enforcement and judicial systems. Federal oversight was established for a minimum of 5 years, with stringent reporting requirements and independent monitoring of arrest patterns, use of force incidents, and prosecution outcomes. Officer Amara Johnson, having proven her integrity under the most challenging circumstances, was appointed interim police chief to lead the reformed department. Her first official acts included implementing body camera requirements, with strict penalties for deactivation, establishing a civilian oversight committee with real disciplinary authority, and creating new hiring practices designed to build a department that reflected the community's diversity. Sophia Washington, whose persistent activism had helped bring attention to Westlake's corruption despite threats and intimidation, was appointed to chair the Civilian Oversight Committee. Under her leadership, the committee established new use of force guidelines, transparent complaint procedures, and community engagement requirements for all officers. The Department of Justice also established a special task force to review every conviction obtained under the corrupt regime. Over 300 cases were immediately identified for review, with dozens of wrongfully convicted individuals released within the first month. The systematic examination of past prosecutions was expected to continue for years, with the full human cost of Westlake's corruption impossible to fully calculate. For Marcus Reynolds, the professional triumph came with personal costs. The physical injuries from his beating had healed, but the psychological trauma of prolonged undercover work, betrayal by a trusted colleague, and repeated threats to his life left deeper wounds. After 30 years of distinguished service, he made the difficult decision to retire from field operations. The work takes a toll, he acknowledged in a private moment with Director Chen after the main trials concluded. "I've given everything I could, but at some point you have to recognize your own limits." His retirement from undercover work did not, however, mean an end to his mission. Marcus accepted a position as senior instructor at the FBI Academy, specializing in civil rights enforcement and police corruption investigations. His experience in Westlake became a case study for new agents, transforming one man's dangerous assignment into institutional knowledge that would inform federal law enforcement for generations. 1 year after the arrests that had shocked Westlake County and the nation, Marcus returned to the community for a memorial service honoring victims of police violence under the former regime. The transformation was remarkable. The police department, once an occupying force feared by black residents, was becoming a partner in community safety. Officers walked neighborhood beats, knew residents by name, and participated in community events. The economic revitalization was equally striking, with black-owned businesses flourishing without the constant harassment and extraction that had previously limited their growth. As Marcus stood at the podium to address the gathered community, he revealed the final piece of his personal connection to the case. "Some of you have asked why I was willing to risk everything for Westlake when I had no prior connection to this community. The truth is, I did have a connection, one I couldn't reveal during the investigation or trials." He paused, the emotion visible on his normally composed face. "I grew up 20 miles from here. When I was 17, I was beaten and wrongfully arrested by officers from the Westlake County Sheriff's Department who were called to assist local police. The officers who did it were never held accountable. That experience could have destroyed my faith in justice, but instead it led me to commit my life to reforming the system from within." The revelation brought the audience to their feet, the personal connection transforming an already powerful story into something that touched the heart of the community's shared experience. In that moment of recognition between a federal commander and the citizens, he had risked everything to protect the true meaning of justice became clear. It wasn't just about punishing corrupt officials or reforming institutions, though those were essential. True justice was about healing communities, restoring dignity, and creating systems that protected all citizens equally, regardless of race or economic status. As Marcus concluded his address, he offered a vision that extended far beyond Westlake County. What happened here is not unique. Similar systems of oppression exist in communities across America. But what happened next can be unique if we make it so. The transformation of Westlake can become a model for national reform proof that change is possible even in the most entrenched systems of injustice. That work belongs to all of us now. The story of Marcus Reynolds in Westlake County became a reference point in the national conversation about policing and racial justice. Case studies, documentaries, and legislative proposals all drew inspiration from the systematic exposure and reformation that had occurred. For countless communities still struggling under corrupt systems, Westlake offered both a roadmap and hope that justice, while sometimes slow and difficult, was ultimately possible. Have you ever witnessed or experienced injustice from those sworn to protect and serve? Comment below with your thoughts on how we can build more accountable systems of justice in our communities. If this story moved you, please like and subscribe to support more content highlighting both the challenges we face and the brave individuals working to overcome them. Share this video with someone who needs to understand that change is possible even in the most deeply rooted systems of injustice. Thank you for joining me on this journey through one of the most remarkable civil rights cases in recent history. Remember, true justice requires both courage and compassion, and each of us has a role to play in creating the communities we deserve. This powerful story of Commander Marcus Reynolds reveals critical truths about justice in America. First, systemic corruption thrives in isolation and secrecy, requiring both insiders and outsiders working together to dismantle it. One brave individual with conviction can initiate change, but sustainable transformation demands community participation and institutional support. Second, racism in policing isn't simply about individual prejudice, but often intertwines with financial incentives, creating systems where discrimination becomes profitable. The Westlake case demonstrates how racial targeting formed the foundation of an elaborate criminal enterprise benefiting officials at multiple levels of government. Third, accountability requires documentation. Marcus's meticulous evidence gathering made the case unassailable. In today's world, recording interactions with authorities can mean the difference between justice served and injustice perpetuated. Fourth, change demands sacrifice. Every participant in Westlake's transformation risks something. Marcus, his physical safety; Amara, her career; Sophia, her freedom; community members, their security. Real progress rarely comes without cost. Finally, justice is a continuous process, not a single victory. The true measure of success in Westlake wasn't just corrupt officials imprisoned, but the creation of new systems designed for equity and accountability. The work of justice is never complete. Each generation must recommit to its principles and remain vigilant against corruption's return. What systems in your community might need similar examination and reform? Has this story changed how you view the relationship between law enforcement and the communities they serve? Drop a comment with justice if you believe everyone deserves equal treatment under the law, regardless of race or background. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button to help others find it. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful true stories of courage in the face of injustice. Share this video with someone who needs to understand that change is possible even within deeply entrenched systems. Thank you for witnessing Commander Reynolds' extraordinary journey from undercover agent to catalyst for Commander Agent transformation. Remember, in the words of Dr. King, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. Sometimes it just needs brave individuals like Marcus to help bend it a little faster.